Well, you've heard of a grand jury. Of course you have. Everyone has. You even see it on your local news. It doesn't have to be something as grandiose as a special prosecutor or the Department of Justice convening a grand jury. Your local district attorney, state's attorney, convenes grand juries pretty much every day for a variety of crimes they prosecute. But have you ever heard of a citizens grand jury? Well, a regular here on the show, former federal prosecutor and founder of Freedom Watch, Larry Klayman, convened a citizens grand jury, and that entity has indicted special counsel Robert Mueller. They claim Mueller tampered with witnesses, obstructed justice, and tried to get witnesses to lie. So that's where I want to welcome in Larry Klayman, former federal prosecutor and veteran trial attorney and GOP strategist, also Newsmax contributor, Wendy Patrick. All right, Larry, first to you. So to the viewers that don't know, explain what a citizens grand jury is and what this one specifically did.
Good question, Sean. And people can read about it at freedomwatchusa.org, right on the homepage. There's the historical background. But in 1992, Justice Antonin Scalia, the great justice, issued an opinion, a majority opinion, in United States versus Williams, where he found that the grand jury does not belong to either the executive branch, the legislative branch, or the judicial branch of government, but to the American people. Now, we have the right to convene our own grand juries. This is the way it was done before we had a Justice Department in 1870. In the Old West, for instance, this is what the people had to mete out justice. We have the right to do it. We have the right to sit and hear evidence. And it doesn't even need to be, as Scalia said, evidence. It can just be proof, reasonable suspicion, because whoever is indicted, in the case Mueller, will be tried at a citizen's court. He'll be convicted, I believe, and he'll be sentenced appropriately. And that's the basis of this. It's not that unusual. In fact, many states have citizens' grand juries.
Okay, but Wendy, to Larry's point, because the entity isn't part of government, it has no teeth, right? It can't ask the police, the U.S. Marshals, a detective squad to go out and arrest people, nor would the government entity in which it resides respond, cooperate, and allow use of their jail cells, correct? I mean, is this a legally binding entity, Wendy?
No, not legally binding, but John, it may have no teeth, but it gives us plenty to chew on in terms of public pronouncements. That's what Larry is doing, and I've watched his latest proceeding on YouTube and followed some of it on the website. It's fascinating. One of the things that Larry mentions, I don't know if he just mentioned it now, but I know he's mentioned it in some of the articles he's written for Newsmax, is that they have basically the discretion to decide whether or not to turn over their findings to a law enforcement agency, who then has the discretion to decide, what do we do with it? Do we follow up on it? Is there sufficient credibility to where we want to open an investigation? And after all, Justice Scalia cited the fact that there is authority that these things exist, but there's no legal authority that they're binding. However, investigations have to start somewhere. And I believe part of what Larry is doing is bringing some of this information into the public entity, the court of public opinion, and who knows whether or not some of that won't eventually find its way into a court of law.
Well, look, I mean, the concept, the concept on its face makes sense, right? I mean, if I'm selected to be on a grand jury tomorrow and somebody convenes a citizens grand jury, invites me, and I accept, I'm not going to look at evidence differently. I'm not going to all of a sudden have preconceived biases, go in with confirmation bias. So in concept, it makes sense. But Larry, how do you enforce any of this? How do you compel government entities that can actually go out and put handcuffs on people to even take a look at the evidence, let alone act on it?
Well, I thank Wendy for her analysis, and she's right. I mean, this is educational. We're telling the American people that we hold our own system of justice in our own hands. Our Justice Department has been compromised. It's become corrupt, not just recently, but over the last decades. It doesn't hold anyone accountable at a high level. They'll burn a few low-level people, but never hold the Clintons, the Obamas, the Muellers, the Comeys accountable. Now, in principle, citizens can do citizens' arrest. Now, we would never advocate doing anything that's not peaceful and that's not legal. So what we're going to do, when and if I get a conviction of Mueller, there'll be a trial, there'll be a pettit jury, there'll be prosecutors, that kind of thing. We will then ask the president to enforce those sentences, or we'll go to a federal judge and ask for that to happen. But in theory, we have the right to enforce it ourselves. You know, watch the movie Wyatt Earp, see what he did, okay, back in the Old West, when there weren't these mechanisms.
Larry, let me ask you this. Aren't there constitutional issues if Mueller isn't there, doesn't have representation, can't face his accusers, doesn't have the right to question witnesses against him?
Well, good question, John. We're going to give him the opportunity to be there. If he doesn't want to be there, then we'll try him in absentia. Look, we're not going by necessarily federal law or state law. We're going by the law of man, moral law, the law of God, in effect, basic principles found in our Judeo-Christian sense of what's right and wrong. We're not bound by that. And consequently, the fact that the Justice Department may have a rule or a court may have ruled that you can't try someone in absentia doesn't mean that the people can't. He's going to have an opportunity. He's going to be given notice as of next week that he has an opportunity to appear, to plead, to defend himself. Let him get his lawyers. Let him get Aaron Zelinsky, Junie Rhee, the others out there, Wiseman. They can come. Let him defend him. In fact, they should be defendants themselves. But we thought we'd start at the top and keep it simple. There's an old adage at the Justice Department. I'm an alumnus. KISS, keep it simple, stupid. Mueller's responsible for what went on. And this is about Jerry Corsi. It's about coercing him into trying to lie, to implicate the president, to threaten him. That's witness tampering. That's obstruction of justice. And what they tried to do was to take down a president. That's also treason. And that's what he's been indicted for. And you can see the indictments at freedomwatchusa.org. And as Wendy did, go to our YouTube videos and see how we did this very professionally. We're also educating the American people that we need to take our justice system back. We don't have a Justice Department. Freedom Watch is your Justice Department.
You know, Wendy, Larry raises some interesting points. I mean, you've worked on all sides of the criminal justice system, the defense side, the prosecutorial side. If more lawyers did things like this around the country, if for no other reason than the educational value, the public relations value, might it help make the criminal justice system a little bit less, I don't want to say biased, but let's say there might be some less inside baseball?
Yeah, what I think is really interesting, John, first of all, the short answer is yes, but let me elaborate. What's interesting about what Larry is doing is it is one thing to do, as so many commentators do, is just go on television and talk. Just say whatever it is without fact checking, without necessarily, not always, but sometimes without the requisite background to be making certain opinions. What a grand jury is basically doing is subpoenaing and having testimony. Now, I know somebody like Robert Mueller isn't going to appear. It was hard enough to get him in front of Congress. I'm sure Larry would agree. Just don't subpoena him for the same date. But even when you do have witnesses that are willing, as I know, Larry, you have, because I've watched the YouTube videos, then what you're doing is you're giving these citizens an opportunity to reach an indictment based on evidence. It's an evidence-based way of getting information out in the public domain, rather than just having people talk where there isn't the kind of foundation that Larry has when convening a citizen grand jury. And I just want to tell our listeners that there are such things in several states. This isn't something that Freedom Watch just came up with. So there are groups of citizens that do this. Sometimes on a less formal basis, we call them watchdog groups. But this is a little different in that actually what Larry's doing is having them come to decisions. Not just listening to evidence, but actually formulating decisions, verdicts, indictments, actually, to be more specific.
Well, and I thank John and you, Wendy, for having me on, because you see, I think people are tired of hearing about more documents, more information. Nothing happens. Okay, we know it doesn't happen. It hasn't happened in 30 years since I founded Judicial Watch. I now run Freedom Watch. We, the people, need to mete out our justice system. And that's what we did in the days leading up to 1776 and thereafter, because King George took our justice system back to the court of St. James, the criminal justice system. So the colony said, no, this system belongs to us. So they, in effect, did citizens' grand juries. They had citizens' trials. And we have to do it again because we are in a state of revolution right now. I don't want to see it violent. I want to see it peaceful. And this is the way that we can mete it out peacefully on behalf of the American public. And I'm going to be asking Mark Meadows to ask questions when Mueller's up on Capitol Hill about what happened to Jerry Corsi. And that's something that's not going to be off limits. Let Mueller, since he wants to put up or shut up, talk about how he threatened Corsi to implicate the president. Otherwise, Corsi was going to be indicted. They offered him a sweetheart plea deal. where he wouldn't have any time. Of course, he said, no, I'm not going to lie under oath, Mr. Mueller. Mueller is responsible for some of the same crimes that he's indicted other people for.
I think it's going to be very interesting when guys like Meadows and Gates and Jordan are able to question Robert Mueller. It's going to be good television at the very least. Wendy, Larry, always good to see you two. Thanks very much.